excited to spend the next 20-ish minutes talking about what marketers can learn from bees. It's a bit of a random topic, but stick with it. I promise it makes sense. So I always like to start with some housekeeping. So the first is that yes, I happen to be the one stood here with a microphone and I am sharing my experiences and my point of view on something. It doesn't mean that that is the best way or the only way, so would welcome discussion afterwards. We're going to think about a slightly broader challenge in terms of where is marketing at the moment, what battles are we having, and actually what can we learn from bees to help counter that. And that brings us onto the landscape. Like, marketing is a tough landscape at the moment. Like, there's more pressure on it than before. Budgets are being tightened. Like, it's really tough. I promise you're all probably doing more than enough within that. So I want to start by taking you back to my very first speaking gig. And this was me on stage at Hero Conference. It was the first time that I had been invited to speak somewhere. I was really excited, equally very nervous, and I was talking about how to build confidence in a hybrid working model over COVID. We had kind of hired, built and retained a team. I was giving some tips on that. So I'd done all of my content, I had practiced it so many times, I could probably still recite it now. Had booked my train, had booked hotel, had figured out who in the team was going to come with me. And then a very senior person in the business at the time asked me a somewhat important but very last minute question, which was this: but Sarah, why are we going if the people in the audience are mainly people who work at competing agencies? They're not going to buy anything from us, so why are we putting time and effort there? And so I'm going to come back to this, so I want you to keep this in your mind, and I'll give you my point of view on it shortly. But this question, I think, perfectly summarizes where we're at in marketing. And where I think we have landed on is a combination of a few different things, but essentially where we have landed is that marketing has become deterministic. And so a little bit of audience participation. I know everyone hates it, so it's just raising your hand. And it's the only time you'll have to do it, so hopefully it's fine. I want you to give me a show of hands if, when you are speaking to a brand, business, a client, anyone that you are doing marketing for, if when you say you want to try a new format, a new channel, a new campaign, are you asked to provide a forecast or an expected ROI figure? Okay, a few of you. And for those of you who are asked that, how many of you do that based on past data? So you look at maybe what worked, or you look at benchmarks, or you pull some information together, and then you, jobs are good, and do the forecast. Show of hands. Okay, most of the same people. And I'm not knocking that way of forecasting, by the way. I'm selfishly just trying to get you all bought into my content. So let's see if it works. And the reason why this is challenging is because the vast majority of future customers will always be unknown to us. And the reason for that is because we only have data on previous customers and past purchase behavior. We don't have anything new, really, that we can go off of. And I really like this chart, and I always whip it up when I'm talking about data. This is from Magic Numbers, and essentially the ROAS metric that most of us will use in paid media is a really interesting one, because actually when you compare it against category demand, there's a really strong correlation which suggests that ROAS from platforms moves with demand for the category as opposed to the strength of your marketing choices. So although we all use it as a metric to suggest marketing success, what it more likely demonstrates is that the demand for the category is growing. And unless you're doing some big brand building activity, that might not be from the activity that you're running. And why this is challenging is because marketing by its very nature is probabilistic. And I'm going to give you an example of this with TV. I've just used TV as an example. You can insert any channel here and the same kind of rules apply. Because if you said to someone, I want to invest some money in TV, they're probably going to go, okay, what are we going to get back for that? Like, is there a return? Are we going to see something off the back of that? But actually, the real reason why we might be suggesting investing in TV, because it might have worked well for us in the past, we don't use it anymore, but kind of want to use it again in the future. It might be because we know consumers think TV advertising is really expensive, and so that makes us look good to consumers. There's always a little bit of kind of positive focus off the back of that. Might be because competitors are on TV, so it must be working if they're investing. It might be because all of the research of marketing shows us that TV pays back over the long term. It might be because we know our audience watch a lot of TV, or any other kind of number of reasons. And so this brings me to, like, why do people still invest in TV or whatever channel it is that we can't attribute a direct return back from? And this brings me back to why I opened with talking about Hero Conference. Because actually, when you go to a conference, or even just the fact that I'm speaking here today, McCann and my bosses have agreed for me to be here today, both in terms of like paying for my train to get here, but also in terms of like giving me the time during my day job to build the slides and to work on the content. And sometimes that's because we go, okay, we know that brand X is going to be at that place and we really want to do business with brand X, so let's go. That's a great idea to turn up. But we don't always know that. We don't always know who's going to be there. But we still go to the conference. And it's the same with like going to a party, for example. If you're invited to a party, you might go, oh, I know that person's going to be there. Haven't caught up with them for a while. Great, really want to speak to them. But we don't always know that. But we still go to the party or the conference or whatever it is. And the reason for that is because if you go to the party or the conference or the networking event, you have a chance to get lucky. And so that might be you meet your new best, I love that there was a laugh, thank you. That might be because you meet your new best friend, or you meet someone who offers you a job, or you meet someone that you do go on to do business with, or you might meet the love of your life. Like, you have no idea what is going to happen in that situation, but if you don't go, you don't put yourself in that position to get lucky. And that's why I think that we need to see marketing as a game of cards, where essentially we can't know exactly what is going to happen from our actions, but what we can do is kind of focus on putting ourselves in situations where we start to predict the upside and the potential positive. And all of the reason for why we're in this space in marketing comes from a really simple human truth. And that is because as humans, we are all susceptible to these three things, like regardless of who you are, what you do, anything. The fact that we are all humans means that you will struggle with these three things to some extent. So the first is loss aversion. So this says that actually we feel losses twice as powerfully as equivalent gains feel good. So actually we're just hardwired to avoid loss. We don't want to lose because that actually feels really terrible, even when we're comparing it to something good. The second is regret aversion. We don't want to do things that might lead to regret. So if we think we're taking a big bet on something, or we think that something is probably going to blow up in our face, we won't do it because the chance of being regretful is unlikely. And also the status quo bias. Like, we are routinely like habitual creatures by our very nature. Like, we all have our own routines. We all love our own routines. And actually it's easier to do what we've always done than to challenge that and do something different. And actually the truth is we don't avoid risk because we're lazy or unimaginative. We avoid risk because we're human and we fear being wrong more than we value being right. And in a team setting or a public setting like marketing, that fear gets multiplied because it's public. And so we stick with what worked last time and the time before that. But I know what you're all thinking. I promised you bees, right? No bees yet. So where do they fit into this? A slide I'm always very grateful that I get to say. Let's talk about the Waggle dance. Woo! So if you don't know what the Waggle dance is, it's this. I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to explain this to you in any sort of technical term. But the Waggle dance is this really smart dance that bees do. Essentially, when a bee finds a source of pollen, they go back to the hive and then they do this really funky little dance. Basically, the angle away from the sun is where the flower is, and how they move is how far away it is. Super technical, really clever. If you want like an interesting YouTube video, just watch bees doing the Waggle dance. But so what happens? Like, how does this Waggle dance work? So let's say that a bee stumbles upon some pollen. And I have to apologize because in my head, like, bees have voices. I've given them an internal monologue. So again, you're going to have to just go with that. So that bee who found the pollen goes back to the hive and goes, guys, you will never believe it. This is great field of flowers over there. And they're all like ripe, full of pollen, great. And so then all the other bees that are back in the hive go, brilliant, I want to go to this field of flowers. And so all the bees go out to the field of flowers. And by doing that, what happens is that the energy expended for all of those bees to get to the flowers is exceeded by the energy that is retrieved in the pollen that they bring back to the hive. And so all of those bees are positively contributing to the hive. Or in other words, positive ROI, which is what we're all here to drive. But it's not that simple, because it can never be that simple. It's not as simple as like a bee just stumbling upon some pollen and then going back to the hive. Because actually, when I started learning about this, I had two questions that were in my head. The first, how does the bee find the source of pollen? Like, does he just stumble upon it? I don't know why they're he's also. Sorry, gendered them too. And is there only one bee that does this? So is there one bee who wanders around looking for pollen, or does the whole hive go out, look for pollen, and come back? So lots of questions. And then I learned that actually it's a really complex system which allows bees to be able to find pollen, because actually it has to be a really delicate balance to make sure that that kind of positive kind of contribution to the hive, or positive ROI, is working effectively. And so this complex system has two categories of bees, which I'm going to introduce you to. So the first are the bees that we call our forager bees. So you can think of these as kind of like worker bees, or the bees that just like chill back at the hive. So these guys all just sit there, they wait for news to come in that pollen is nearby, and then they all go out to the flower. But we have another type, and those are our scout bees. And you can think of these as the bees who do the waggle dance. So I guess kind of like the funkier ones of the hive. But essentially, these are the ones that are a bit random. They like just go to a new field or go over a hill that they've never been before, and they just kind of explore around, stumble upon a flower, bring that back to the hive, and then the forager bees who are sat back in the hive can then all go out. And scout bees account for about 5 to 10% of the hive. So there's not loads of them. There's not like, I don't know how many bees are in a hive. I was going to say hundreds, but that feels like a lot. There's not loads of them who are going out sorting for stuff. Because actually, if that happened and they all went out and one of them found pollen, they're going to come back to an empty hive because no one's going to be there, right? So then that, again, that kind of model of efficiency doesn't work. And so it's all about balance. It's about putting out the right amount of scout bees that you can find the pollen before coming back to a hive which has the bulk of the bees that can then go out and take advantage of that pollen. Because otherwise, if we don't have this complex system in a hive, one of two things happen. It's going to get dark for a second, but I promise all up from this point onwards. The first is that the hive gets trapped in a local maximum and they starve to death and all the bees die. So essentially, that's because the bees will only go to the fields that they know. Inevitably, that pollen's going to run out. They're going to bring it all back. Pollen is only created however quickly in a flower. And so actually, they run out of resources. And that means that the hive can't go, they can't do their job, and the hive ultimately starves to death. Or you never get lucky, and you never find a potential new source of pollen or a new field of flowers, which might actually only be like one over from where the bees were looking, but they just weren't exploring because that wasn't their job in the hive. And this introduces the explore-exploit trade-off, which is this. It says that there is a necessary trade-off and a right ratio between the proportion of your resources you expend in exploiting what you already know and the resources you spend in foraging for sources of value that you haven't yet discovered. And I really like this quote from Dr. Thomas Seeley. He is a professor of biology at Cornell, like total honeybee expert, writes books on them. And he says this: if all bees became exploiters, the colony would die, because exploration isn't waste, it's survival. And why I really like this quote in particular is because I think it brings us back to business. Because actually business has to be about discovery. It has to be about discovering kind of the needs, wants, and the values of consumers and what's important to them and how you can kind of maybe provide that for them. And it has to be a trade-off. Marketing and business has to be a trade-off between exploiting what you know works really well and contributes to the bottom line, but also exploring the things that you don't know and haven't considered and don't know whether they work. Because if advertising over-optimizes on what works immediately, it's great short-term. And this is where we're at in marketing, right? Because with the rise of digital, we've gone into kind of the standard hype cycle in terms of everyone using digital. Works really well. You see your little sales spike, like beautiful, but at some point you scoop up all of that in market demand and there's none left for you to take advantage of. Because it can really quickly lead to stagnation, diminishing returns, and channel fatigue, because you're speaking to the same people that might be on the same channels, using the same formats, and actually you're not kind of delving into new areas. And it definitely doesn't support kind of long-term business objectives. And it also means you'll never get lucky. Like, you're never putting yourself in a position to try something that actually might work incredibly well compared to what you were expecting. And you'll never discover that new source of business, custom, audience, market, like whatever it is, whatever you're exploring, you won't know whether that works unless you explore it. And I mean, it's not a marketing talk without whacking a Binet and Field quote on the slide. But the long and short of it is exactly a re-expression of the explore-exploit trade-off. Because it talks about driving both short and long-term effects, feeding the funnel with new prospects, two different kinds of marketing activity in the same way that we have two different types of bees in the hive. And they're not the only ones, right? Like, there's a whole wealth of marketing science out there which talks about the importance of finding new sources of growth for that kind of long-term business development. There are books, there are reports, there are companies, there are like whole institutes set up to be able to do this. But ultimately still, despite all of this, in marketing, the explorer has become off limits, especially in recent years. And I'm not knocking all of that marketing science, and I am not hating on any of that. But actually, even if Binet and Field go, you should put 60% of your budget into brand, like, it's really hard to convince people to invest money when they don't know what the return's going to be, or they don't know if it's going to work, or they don't know if it's going to be successful, right? Even though not all of your money has to go into explore. So how we saw with the bees, they don't send all of the bees out to explore because they don't need to, right? They only need to send enough out that they stay ahead of the amount of pollen that they need. And it's exactly the same when it comes to kind of an investment figure. And so I was going to stand here and talk a little bit about Duolingo, because I wanted to try and bring this to life a little bit more with like a real example. And Duolingo did a talk at Cannes this year about how they spend 30% of their budget on new things, exploring what they don't know. And then I realized that that's kind of more easily said than done for someone like Duolingo. Again, I'm not hating on Duolingo, please don't sue me. But it's really easy for them to invest 30% of their budget into Explore because they've just got a bigger budget, right? It's kind of easier to put 30% somewhere where you don't know. So instead, I wanted to come with kind of some more real examples. So I've got 3 examples for you, which are from clients that I've worked on. And hopefully they give you kind of a breadth of what Explore could mean, because Explore doesn't mean, okay, you definitely have to invest over here, or you have to try TV, or you have to invest a certain amount. It's more of a mindset thing. So I want to kind of demonstrate that in a few examples. So the first is this example. So this is for a sofa company. And the reason why I like this one, and I bought this example today, is because actually they did a really good job of injecting some personality and some life into a very rational, very low interest category. And so they didn't do anything different with their exploit strategy. They continued investing in always on PPC and paid social to keep driving those direct-to-consumer safe sales. So nothing different there, still investing. However, they tried something different with Explore, and so they did a live sofa rave on Instagram during lockdown. And so this was a really low cost. They just did it in their office. So it's a really good example of quite cheap brand building, because ultimately it is a brand building thing if we're going to put it into a bucket. But this worked really well. It drove loads of positive interest. So there was loads of buzz, loads of word of mouth, lots of brand sentiment being driven. And yes, those people didn't go on to purchase a sofa the next day, because that's not how it works. But actually that was a really kind of low cost way to explore something new and try something new and see how it worked for the brand. The next example is a media supply chain example. And the reason why I like this one is because it's a media buying innovation. And I always think that when you're thinking about exploring or trying something new, you often don't think about it from that point of view. You want the really sexy, exciting, stunt thing that's whatever. But actually we don't always think about actually how can we just buy media differently or better. And so this was actually from across all of our clients who were running programmatic. And we were buying programmatic media with a really standard site list. So kind of how we'd always been doing it. We knew it was working. We'd kind of known what we were investing in based on the client. But to explore, we tried something a bit different. So we did a direct integration with Pubmatic, and we created these really bespoke, really curated marketplaces of lists for all of our different clients. And this worked really well, massive spikes. It was a 325% increase in click-through rate. CPMs were really solid still, so those didn't skyrocket because we were investing differently. And actually why I like this example is for 2 reasons. So the first is that it starts to think about that balance between scale and quality. And actually in our first example of exploit, like we were doing pretty good scale on just buying against standard site lists, but actually we could still get really good scale from this curated marketplace, but it was just higher quality within that. And the second reason I like this one is because it was tested on really small budgets. So we were investing anywhere from £100 to £500 a week, depending on the client, in this kind of explore approach. And so this is why I like this one, because actually explore doesn't mean that you have to go and spend 10 grand in a channel or whatever it might be. It's just trying something new. And this worked really well. So now actually the explore strategy became the exploit because we knew it worked well for us. And that then freed up some budget to do a little bit more exploration. And the final example is on prospecting. And again, I like this example because it's thinking about using data in a new way. And so this was for a DIY and household retailer. So we were doing some prospecting via really standard kind of audience targeting, just based on the segments that we had in platform, like not really doing anything super smart or super interesting with it. But we wanted to take that one step further. And so again, we did a little bit of exploration by partnering with Criteo, used some retail data. And what that meant is we could create some kind of improved targeting relevance. So actually we were speaking to people either in a more relevant way or a more targeted way. Well, that meant we could kind of freshen up the creative. And again, this led to kind of improvements in ROAS, although I've already made my feelings on ROAS clear, but let's pretend that we're still working with ROAS. And yeah, it worked really well. So again, this became our exploit strategy, and then that freed up some budget to be able to do explore. Because the ultimate aim of marketing is to get new people to purchase from you, because the people who are going to buy from you will just kind of keep buying from you, probably even if you don't do anything, because they like the brand, they like the product, they know what they're getting into. But actually, you can only do that when you focus on customers you don't know, as well as those that you do, because otherwise you're never exploring what those new people could look like. So although that bee might go out 9 times and return to the hive empty-handed all of those 9 times, actually the return on the 10th time with the source of pollen is worth it because it secures the long-term survival of the hive. So I've gone through a lot there. If there are 3 things you take away, I want it to be these 3. So the first is just to explore more, and that doesn't mean that you have to like switch up your channel strategy or your format or whatever it is that you're doing. Actually, just explore more, just challenge things and ask the questions and see if there is a way that we can be more exploratory in how we just show up day to day. Second is try and give some budget. And I'm hoping this demonstrates that actually it doesn't have to be the 60-40. It can be as little as 99% of your budget goes into exploit and 1% goes into explore. But actually just moving the dial that much is going to make a difference in terms of that long term. And put yourself in situations where you can get lucky, right? None of us can predict the future, especially at the moment with all of the noise that is going on in marketing. So actually just put yourself in situations where you are more likely to see something good happen. And chances are it probably will. Because in every successful hive, there are a few brave bees out there looking for something new. So the question we really need to ask ourselves is, who is it in our brands, our businesses, our companies, our day-to-day, who is doing the same? Thank you very much.